Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to decode the invisible forces that dictate the prices of absolutely everything you buy. And look, we're not just talking about abstract numbers on a whiteboard here. We are looking at the surprising, real-world consequences of human behavior whenever a price tag changes. It's a real game changer. Okay, think about this question for a second. If the government suddenly seizes a massive shipment of illegal drugs, does drug-related crime go up or down? Now, your instinct might be to say, well, obviously it goes down. But the reality is actually a massive counterintuitive paradox. To understand why, we need to learn a specific economic concept that is basically a detective's magnifying glass for the real world. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with the core concept of elasticity, move on to pricing and total revenue, then income and related goods, the elasticity of supply, and finally, we'll solve some of those real-world economic mysteries. Starting with Section 1, the core concept, elasticity, or, as I like to think of it, understanding buyer flakiness. So, price elasticity of demand is formally defined as a measure of the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price. But honestly, it's really just a measure of consumer loyalty, or like we said, flakiness. When the price of something goes up, do you abandon it immediately, or do you stick with it no matter what? What's really interesting about this slide is how it clearly separates those flaky buyers from the desperate buyers. If demand is elastic, it means buyers respond substantially to price changes. They're flaky. This happens with luxuries. You don't strictly need a yacht, so if the price jumps, you just walk away. It also happens in narrowly defined markets like vanilla ice cream, because you can easily just swap it out for chocolate. But look over at the right side. Inelastic demand means buyers only respond slightly to price changes. These are your necessities, like life-saving medication. You are going to buy it regardless of the price. Time also matters here. In the short run, you might be stuck paying high gas prices, making you inelastic, but over a long time horizon, you could eventually buy a hybrid car, making you elastic. Now, to actually calculate this flakiness, economists use what's called the midpoint method. And don't worry, the math is actually super simple. Think of it like a recipe. Instead of standard percentage changes, you just take the change in quantity and the change in price, and you divide each by the average, or the midpoint, of the initial and final levels. Then, you just divide the quantity change by the price change and drop any minus signs. Let's look at a real-world calculation involving the iPhone. When the price jumps from $400 to $600, sure, demand falls. But using our midpoint method, the calculated elasticity lands at exactly 0.58. Because this number is less than 1, economists consider the demand for the iPhone to be mathematically inelastic. Apple customers are incredibly loyal, so a huge price hike really only causes a relatively small drop in sales. Moving on to Section 2, pricing and total revenue. This is the big aha moment for businesses. Listen, every business owner wants to maximize total revenue, right? That's just the price of the good multiplied by the quantity sold. The eternal question for any business is, if I raise my prices, am I going to make more money? And the answer entirely depends on the elasticity of their customers. So, the crucial point is this golden rule of pricing strategy. If your customers have inelastic demand, meaning they view your product as a necessity, price and total revenue move in the exact same direction. You raise the price, your revenue goes up, simply because they keep buying. But if your customers have elastic demand, price and total revenue move in opposite directions. If you sell a luxury good and raise the price, so many people are going to flake out that your total revenue will actually crash. And here's the kicker. It's not a static label either. On a straight-line demand curve, you might think the elasticity is constant, but it absolutely isn't. Up at the high-price, low-quantity end of the line, demand is highly elastic, sitting at a massive 13.0. People are super sensitive to price drops there. But as we move down the line to low prices and high quantities, buyers get saturated and elasticity plummets all the way down to 0.1, making it highly inelastic. Section 3, income and related goods. Because, it goes beyond just the price tag. Let's look at two new terms. Income elasticity measures how your buying habits shift when your paycheck changes. Normal goods have positive elasticity, so you get a raise, you buy more steaks. But inferior goods have negative elasticity. You get that same raise, but you buy fewer instant noodles. Then there's cross-price elasticity, which measures how the price of a totally different good impacts you. Substitutes like hot dogs and hamburgers have a positive relationship. Hot dog prices go up, you buy more hamburgers. Complements, on the other hand, like hot dogs and hot dog buns, have a negative relationship. If hot dog prices jump, your demand for the buns is going to drop right along with them. That brings us to Section 4, the elasticity of supply. How flexible are the sellers? For suppliers, elasticity is all about flexibility and production capacity. Supply is usually very inelastic in the short run. I mean, if the price of beachfront properties skyrockets tomorrow, you can't just magically conjure up more beaches, right? The response is slight. But in the long run, supply becomes much more elastic. Factories can be built, new farms can be planted, and companies can expand their maximum capacity to meet those high prices. And finally, Section 5, real-world economic mysteries. We've got the tools, now let's solve the paradoxes. Here is our first mystery. Imagine agricultural scientists invent a brilliant new hybrid of wheat that increases crop yields per acre by a whopping 20%. Now, this sounds like an absolute triumph. But can good news for farming actually be devastating news for the farmers themselves? Yes, absolutely it can. It's because of the wheat paradox. Let's walk through it. The new hybrid means supply surges, shifting the supply curve way to the right. That massive supply pushes the overall price of wheat down. Now remember our elasticity rules. Wheat is a basic foodstuff, a true necessity, which means demand is inelastic. People aren't suddenly going to eat 20% more pancakes just because wheat is a little cheaper. Because demand is inelastic, that steep drop in price dramatically outweighs the slight increase in sales. The farmers end up making less total revenue. The technological marvel literally hurts their bottom line. Okay, let's pivot to another one. In the 1970s, the oil cartel OPEC orchestrated massive reductions in the supply of oil, creating colossal price spikes and making just incredible profits. But since then, they've repeatedly failed to maintain those sky-high prices. Why is that? And this brilliantly illustrates the power of the time horizon determinant we learned earlier. In the short run, oil is incredibly inelastic. You still got to drive to work tomorrow, no matter what the gas price is. So OPEC's initial supply cut caused massive price spikes and huge revenue. But in the long run, human behavior changes. Consumers eventually bought more fuel-efficient cars, and competing producers found brand new oil reserves outside of OPEC. So both supply and demand became highly elastic over time, which stabilized the prices and totally defeated OPEC's long-term strategy. Finally, let's circle back to that ultimate hook from the start of our explainer. If the government significantly increases the number of federal agents devoted to the war on drugs, what actually happens to drug-related crime? Let's strictly analyze the underlying economic mechanics of this market to see what the numbers say. We can call this the drug crime paradox. When agents seize drugs, the supply drops and the street price skyrockets. But look at the demand side of the equation. For individuals suffering from addiction, illegal drugs are a short-term necessity, meaning their demand is highly inelastic. A higher price does not substantially reduce their use. Because the price jumps but the quantity they need doesn't drop, they need much more cash fast, which mathematically correlates to an increase in crimes like theft or burglary in the short run. However, in the long run, demand becomes more elastic. Sustainably high prices discourage experimentation, which leads to fewer new users over time, ultimately decreasing drug-related crime later on. It really is an incredible lens to view policy through. We've seen how a simple concept like elasticity, basic consumer flakiness, can explain ruined farmers, defeated cartels, and the unintended consequences of federal laws. So I'll leave you with this final thought. When you look at these examples, do market forces ultimately solve the problems they create, or do they just change the timeline of the consequences? Keep that in mind the next time you see a price change. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the economics around you.